we felt like we were doing pretty
This
good.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, just got the meeting recorded message. So let's see, I think that was about it on the drivers. We are spending a pretty good amount of money on advertising in the Raleigh area. So we have seen some really good improvements on the numbers of applications that are coming through. So again, I think I already said this, but we do have high hopes that in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll start seeing some improvements. And then the last thing I was going to talk about was the actual management of Go Raleigh. A lot of folks think that the bus operators are city employees, and they are not. Cities and municipalities are not allowed to negotiate with unions, and our Go Raleigh bus operators and maintenance employees are part of a union, so that service has to be contracted out to a third party. We do have to follow both federal and city procurement rules, and those rules require that we rebid the management of Go Raleigh and our Go Raleigh Access program at a minimum every 5 to 7 years. So we are at that point. We rebid our contract. We put it on the street last May, and it was a pretty long and agonizing process. But we finally got to a point where our Raleigh Transit Authority approved the recommended company in December. And then on January 3rd, we brought the contract approval request to the Raleigh City Council, and it was approved unanimously. So we are now working with the company whose name is RATP Dev. You don't say it, you spell it. RATP Dev. And we hope to have a startup contract by the end of this week, being routed through our city process, and have those folks on site in February to start the transition from our current management company over to the new management company. And then the hopes are that they'll take over the full operation by sometime late April to early May. So that's about what I've got for you this evening. I'll be glad to answer any questions if anybody has them.
David, I do have one for you, and I don't want to put you on the spot. I'll just mention it to you. You know that we are all waiting breathlessly for the development of the transit center at North Hills. I've gone over there and I've taken pictures of what's currently under construction, since the transit station is in the same probable location as the 30-story building. And quite frankly, I don't see, unless they come in under the building, I don't see how there's the geography to put the transit station in without going under the new construction or whatever is going to be there. It's a very confined space currently. That's kind of why I'd like to see them just put everything off until they finish working on North Hills. So I just wonder if you had any comments relative to that, and whether bus service is currently disrupted from it.
We see occasional detours from construction that's ongoing right now. Typically, it's a day-to-day thing. They set up there on I think the backside loop. Occasionally gets closed down, and it impacts either the outbound or the inbound trips. I can't remember which it is because I don't deal with the detours on a day-to-day basis. But we do see occasional detours with the existing construction work that's being done today. To address the future transit center, obviously there's a rezoning request for I think there's 5 different nodes, as they call them, on the North Hills or the Kane property there. As a condition that has been negotiated and put forth as part of the rezoning process, states that the developer will provide a land dedication, or they will dedicate land. I may not say this exactly right, but they will be required to dedicate land for the transit center within the Six Forks node. And that is about it. And that's all I can say. I don't know where it would be within the Six Forks node. I'm assuming that would be determined as they continue with their development plans. Larry, I would agree with you 100% that they're probably not just going to give us the space that we would need and not build over the top of it. So our presumption is that it will be on the ground floor of one of those buildings that gets developed. That would not be uncommon. We currently have a transit center at Crabtree Valley Mall. It's not under a building, but it's under a parking deck. So we operate in that type of environment on a daily basis. We have about 6 different routes that pulse in and out of Crabtree Valley Mall without any kind of an issue at all. So I would not anticipate that, if the transit center property ended up being built over, their development would be built over the top of the transit center. That should not prevent any kind of or cause any kind of a problem for us. But
Good, David.
at the end of the day, we're not going to know that until the rezoning gets approved and they start submitting development plans. And
well, you may
wind up with that.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, that some of the language in that rezoning condition states that it must be an agreeable site to both the developer and our transit division in the city. So they can't just force something in there on us. We have to review it and approve it ourselves.
Excellent. And thanks for the comparison to Crabtree.
Yeah. We've done research, around the country, and there are several other locations that have very similar overbuilds on them. I mean, Raleigh Union Station, the development that Go Triangle and is building over there, it's going to be almost an exact same scenario, all residential, ground floor, transit center, probably about the same size as what we'll end up with here at North Hills.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much.
Hadn't even thought about that as an example, but
okay.
Any other questions? If not, Larry does have all of my contact information. Again, I apologize, I don't have a slide to put my contact information up, but Larry and I talk frequently via email, and Larry, feel free to distribute my contact information, to anybody that wants it, or just, send it out as part of your distribution list whenever you want to.
I'd be glad to do that. Okay, thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I think we have, all right, let's stand in here. I think we have Ann here for the next part of the program.
Okay. Should I just jump in, Larry?
Yes, go ahead, Ann. I should have introduced you, Ann Conlon. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ann Conlon. I am a senior transportation engineer in the transportation department for the city, and the division we call mobility, strategy, and infrastructure. So we cover planning and also development review. And we help advance projects during the early phases of their development, when the full design of projects later transitions over to the city's engineering services department. So Larry asked me to come speak about the Midtown Multimodal Bridge. And we do have an upcoming meeting. We are finalizing materials today and tomorrow for that. And we are about to print thousands of postcards and get them in the mail as soon as we can. So I'm gonna share my screen here. So you'll see that this presentation mentions February 16th because that is the date of the meeting. So you're getting a bit of a preview here of the presentation that will be at the meeting, but we're also holding it as an open house. So we'll have staff on hand to talk through this content and hear from you all. So I'm going to run through these fairly quickly, and then once I get through them all, I will take this down and be happy to talk through your questions. So the Midtown Multimodal Bridge is one of 2 bridges that were identified in the Walkable Midtown Plan as one of the 7 big moves, as they were called, out of that plan. The bridge is intended for walking, biking, driving, all modes to be able to get across I-440, and would connect between Navajo Drive on the north side and Barrett Drive, or Wake Towne Drive on the south side. It's also a key link along the Big Branch Greenway connector. So it's really a cross-cutting project here that's going to serve some different needs for the city. So since the Walkable Midtown Plan was adopted, we've worked with a consultant to take the planning analysis that was done for that plan and develop out some more thought through alternatives for the bridge. And I specifically want to kind of call out the impetus for the alternatives analysis we did was the area specific guidance section of the comprehensive plan that was put into place when council adopted the Walkable Midtown Plan. So the area specific guidance identifies that there should be a future study on the bridge that considers the guidance you see on screen and looks at ways we can make this connection. So we did start with the alignment that is currently in our adopted street plan and came out of that plan as kind of, we call it alternative 1. So this very much maps the lines that you see in the street plan and has the biggest impacts on existing buildings and businesses, in particular on the southwest side. And so, you know, this was kind of the baseline that we are comparing to. We then looked at 2 alternatives that are trying to meet those guidelines and reduce the impacts that you saw up here in alternative 1. So we looked at this 2 ways. This alternative 2 uses a roundabout to help balance traffic flow between the different destinations that this street network will connect. That roundabout provides a lot of flexibility kind of as the area develops and demand shifts in the area. It's also a very safe type of traffic control in terms of performance. You see fewer crashes for all modes and roundabouts, but it does have significant right-of-way acquisition on the undeveloped property there. So there's an impact there. And then the third alternative is similar, but without the roundabout component. And is so able to reduce some of those impacts, but also has some other challenges that have to do with how traffic moves through these different streets. So these are the different alternatives. We're going to have the full report, our consultant completed on these, posted, and be meeting with folks to talk through them and hear your feedback. The goal isn't necessarily, you know, to get a vote on these, but to use both a public survey and the in-person meeting to understand the priorities and preferences and goals and make sure that we're advancing the design in a way that supports them. So I'm going to move into cross-section options. We also wanted to hear from the community about the bridge section itself while we're here to kind of inform how we move forward later into design. The default way of allocating space on this bridge is following what our street plan would show, which is to separate the bike space here from the pedestrian space across the bridge. So that's one option that we could move forward, is to keep those 2 uses separate. A second option is to just combine those and to share these paths on each side of the bridge. And there's pros and cons of that. you can have more conflicts between users, but it can also give you just a little more flexibility and breathing room when groups are traveling. And a third option is to offset things and provide a really wide shared use path on one side, but keep all the bicycle travel on one side of the bridge and just devote a sidewalk for pedestrians on the other side. So we'll also have this information out and be wanting to talk to folks about kind of what they think would be most useful in this connection. So coming out of the public engagement period, which will go through the month of February, we would like to identify a preferred alternative or some refinement of one of the alternatives. And if it is different than that baseline alternative one that I showed, proceed with a comprehensive plan amendment to make sure that that's fully reflected in our comprehensive plan. And ultimately, we are going to be thinking about how we can start to get funding to advance this project further. The project is not currently funded for design or construction. So this slide is kind of intended for at the meeting, but again, we'll have all these materials, be talking to everyone and then pointing them to our website to hopefully complete that survey there. So I'm going to take this down. Come back here. Are there any questions I can answer about that?
Shane Collins, North Hills. I did have a question about it looks like Quail Hollow. It looks like in all three options, Quail Hollow is going to be extended through to the new multimodal pathway. And the other question on a survey, how can we access that survey online?
Yes, so all three options do connect into Quail Hollow. I'm going to just maybe briefly put on screen the street plan. So they all connect in this way to kind of tie into Quail Hollow, which will connect up to St. Albans and then terminate as a T there at St. Albans. So it's not, the north side design doesn't really vary between the alternatives. It varies a little bit depending on the angle we're coming across the belt line. The survey is not live yet, but we are finalizing it and we will get the link to you as soon as that's up.
Thank you.
I have a
And
question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is Cynthia Curran, and I have a question. How are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you, Cynthia?
So I have a question. Since the first slide that you presented said that the city council's intention was to avoid condemnation of existing buildings and existing businesses, and the alternative one that you presented goes directly through Barrett Square condominiums, where I have 4 office units, and there are 80 office units there, then why doesn't the city go ahead and eliminate that alternative, since it would require the condemnation of 80 individual office condominium units and 80 individual office businesses, when they could instead put it on alternative 2 or 3, which is a vacant lot that has no businesses on it and no buildings on it. So I would like to request that the city would go ahead and honor the original definition that the city council adopted in December 2020 and made part of the comprehensive plan for Midtown, which was to avoid the condemnations.
Yeah, I think that is a great point, Cynthia. The intent of this process was to find viable alignments that best meet those goals. And I agree that when I look at that area specific guidance, I think alternative 1 does not best meet those goals now that we've found these other alternatives. So the point of this process is to kind of share back the analysis that we've done, hear from the public, get that documentation from everybody and kind of reviewing, here's how we think we should proceed and then go back to council. We wanted to have this touch point before we just completed the analysis and went straight to council with a comp plan amendment. We wanted to take the time to talk to everybody about this work that we're doing.
And I think, Ann, one of the other points that the city council had adopted on December 15, 2020 was to try to avoid crossing Big Branch Creek more than once. And if you use alternative 1, you will cross, there will be 2 bridge structures crossing Big Branch Creek, which is not environmentally good. Whereas if you use either alternative 2 or alternative 3, you will only cross Big Branch Creek one time, which is more environmentally sound. So wouldn't that be another reason to eliminate alternative 1?
I think that's exactly what this process is intended to do, Cynthia, is to lead us to the thing that best meets the guidance that's in the comp plan.
And here's my last question. Who will make, well, actually, it's a combination question. Who will make the decision of what will be presented to the Planning Commission or to the City Council? Will that be you? Or which alternative?
That would be, city staff would take the feedback we get, combine that with the analysis we've done and make a recommendation on that. And then of course, ultimately council will make the decision. I think if somehow we opted to think that we shouldn't take a comp plan amendment, I would expect we would go to council and share these findings so that they could weigh in on that since we're going through this process. So we're going to report back to council one way or another on this.
So here's my last question, which is, I know that the vacant lot that the city council identified on December 15, 2020, as the lot that they would direct the city staff to consider a bridge through the vacant lot, so it wouldn't impact businesses or buildings. That vacant lot has now been purchased by a developer, and they are seeking rezoning at 2925 Computer Drive. Will the city require as a condition of the rezoning that that property accommodate the bridge for either alternative 2 or 3? Will there be an easement? Will there be a lien required from the city as part of the rezoning conditions that would require them to accept the bridge?
So I'll try to answer, and I'll let my colleague Jason jump in if he would like to. Council can make the decision to approve or not approve that rezoning, and could, I guess, make a decision to only approve it with certain conditions. We can never require someone to submit conditions, but it will be within their purview to decide, is it appropriate to rezone this or not, and under what conditions. We will certainly be flagging as part of our staff review that there's a critical connection here with 2 alternatives that go through that property. So we are going to make that very clear in our analysis, but that's really a council decision. Do you want to add anything to that, Jason?
That was exactly what I was going to say, that the zoning conditions are often offered voluntarily by a property owner when they're rezoning property, and a rezoning is a legislative decision that council can consider any number of factors in making.
Well, I attended the first meeting, the first public meeting, and posed the question to the developer, would they accept the bridge on the property? And they said, yes, if the city said they wanted the bridge on the property, they would accept the bridge on the property. So it seems like we have the potential that it would all fit if the city would ask for that condition.
Larry, can I say something real quick?
Go ahead.
I was just going to add that, Cynthia, I got your email and I plan to look at it closer tomorrow, but I'm happy to connect with you on this point as well. And I'm sure that the developer's attorney will be reaching out to all of us as the case progresses. And it's definitely something I'll be looking at because we need that critical connection. And so I understand your concern with the property you own, and you and I have engaged on this, I think, a couple times over the past few years. So I definitely hear you, and I saw your email, and I know it's probably really stressful to see scenarios being proposed and one that directly affects your property, but your concerns are valid and they're heard, and I just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We have a couple other people that I see have hands up. But before we do that, though, I just wanted to point out to perhaps Jonathan and Ann, this is a perfect case where you have a realtor step in on a critical piece of property, and it'll be almost impossible to make a judgment on this rezoning without a site plan, because you have the bridge, which will probably go right through the middle of his property, yet his building could be on one side or the other, the way the property lays out. In other words, property is such that it can accommodate both, but without a site plan and just a simple request for rezoning, there's no way to know at the early stages of the application approval. Just let it go at that. Okay, Alan Wiggs, I think you were trying to raise your hand, but weren't able to.
That is correct, Larry. Thank you for recognizing me. Ann, I'd like to thank you for your presentation on this about the bridge. My only question to you, Ann, is can you possibly do a streetscape cross section that kind of matches the Gorman Drive cross section, where there is a separated bike facility that allows both directions on one side of the road as an alternative?
We can definitely look at that. Thank you with the suggestion. We're very early on in the process. I will.
Yeah, it would be nice to show the general public that we already have a two-direction bike lane in the city crossing a bridge and a major bicycle transportation corridor. So this, I feel, in the future will be a major bicycle transportation corridor. So it'd be nice to have that separated facility that is in both directions on one side of the road. And the nice thing about both directions on one side of the road is it kind of allows you a little more breathing room when you're riding, because you don't always meet people head on at this time. Maybe in the future, there'll be a lot more head on meets, but at this time, I think it'd be a more comfortable situation. And but that's my input on this. The other question is also, have you talked to the BPAC about reaching out to them and making sure they're advising everybody about the pedestrian and bicycle impacts of this corridor? And the other thing is the connecting road where the roundabout was going to be located. I guess that goes, if I'm correct, is that the road that goes over by the courtyard and over to Trader Joe's? Is that the same road there?
Yes.
And if it is that road, it would be nice to talk to the BPAC about either getting an on-road two-direction bike lane or a single direction, depending on what the city would allow down that road to allow everybody to be able to access the I won't call any names, but I will say the Wegman / Trader Joe's area, and get to that area, because that will definitely be an awesome corridor for both the neighborhood and all people that live in the North Raleigh area. So thanks again for your time, and I look forward to the meeting. What time do you think that meeting would start, if it started on that February date?
We are looking at an open house from 4:30 to 7:30 at the 5 Point Center for Active Adults.
Excellent, an excellent location. But thanks again. And I look forward to seeing a couple of these cross sections, and hopefully we can get city council to weigh in and figure out how to make this a possibility. And also state or federal funding, because it's crossing an interstate. Is that anywhere in the works too, as a possibility?
Yeah, we will definitely be seeking some kind of funding like that for a project of this cost. We'd be looking to match city funds with federal funds probably. But that's part of why the important next step would be to advance design enough that we can get to a better cost estimate We did some cost analysis at this phase, but it's really not detailed enough to have a very good sense of that cost. And I
Okay.
did want to mention, thank you for the comments. We haven't gone to BPAC yet, but we are going to their February meeting, and we're going to be giving them this presentation and hearing from them during the input.
Okay, and just, look at some of the connectivity when you talk to them. I think they'd really appreciate that as far as the bike transportation grid. But thanks again. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you, Alan. Whitney?
Yeah, so I think this probably dovetails with that last question, but as a guy who, takes the Greenway, doesn't like riding on the roads. And I run that track down to Wake Forest Road from up in, the Lead Mine Road area and everything. Is this the start of something that I could safely get up to Midtown from the Crabtree Creek Trail without having to worry about getting into cars going fast and that type of thing? It sounds like there's a way through there on neighborhood streets to get up there. Is that the case if this was put in?
Yeah, great question. I'm gonna link to the parks bond referendum page if you haven't seen that, because the Big Branch Greenway corridor makes the connection you're talking about, and there is some funding in the bond that was just approved to work on some of the pieces along this corridor. They're still in the phase of kind of planning out what exactly will happen, but the goal is to make the linkage you're describing.
Okay, and that would open up Quail Hollow and everything all to be able to get down to. Yeah, okay. Thanks.
That kind of raises another question, which I was kind of waiting for either one of you to get to. Quail Hollow. As most people know, there are two sections to Quail Hollow. I really wish we'd rename one of them. The map that's within the Midtown area plan shows the connection of Quail Hollow in the Eastgate neighborhood as pushing through from the existing Quail Hollow main drive down to St. Albans, and then making that connection all the way down, which would bring us back to where the bridge ultimately will wind up. The parks pathway for the Greenway shows it a little differently, and I guess at some point the two will have to come back together. They show it from Hardemont crossing part of Kane's property and then probably connecting along that back road and ultimately to the bridge too. So just pointing out there's a little bit of a discrepancy perhaps in two different routings of how to get to the Greenway and make that connection. We've always questioned whether that's going to be a Greenway at the end of Quail Hollow in the Eastgate section, or whether it would be something more formal. It looks like one way or the other. It's probable that it'll be a Greenway connection. That's also a wetland though, and has the same problem that you'd have with the one property that where the bridge is going to go through. So just pointing that out. Be nice to get a clarification on that at some point as well. And I guess that's up to Parks and Rec, unless Jason, you know a little bit more about that.
I wasn't actually not familiar with the map you're referencing that showed that alignment. And then the conversations I have had with park staff, there may be many different alternatives, and they're going to be going through a process to figure out what the right way to complete this Greenway link, or this Greenway trail would be. I think that a Greenway from the current end of Quail Hollow near Hardemont to St. Albans, just as a Greenway trail, is a very likely outcome. But the wetland impacts and managing how it interacts with the floodway and floodplain in that area is certainly a part of how they'll have to go through the alternatives. They may not want to promise that and use an existing street connection in some of the material because of the uncertainty.
The second side of that question, I guess, goes back to that property in question, where the bridge is going to land on Wake Towne Drive to connect to Wake Towne Drive. Normally, when the developers come in, they're responsible for the roadways, if there's any roadways going through that area. Correct me if I'm wrong. In this particular case, I guess it's a city DOT project for the bridge. So that, and probably most of the funding I would think would come from DOT. So is there a developer contribution, maybe having to do with that roundabout and connection back over to the other roadway on the other side? Is there a developer contribution expected?
A property owner is developing or subdividing property as an obligation to implement the street plan. And there's often times in which if that impact of the property isn't proportional, they can get a reimbursement for those portions of it. But they have no obligation under normal subdivision regulations to build a structure or to partially build a structure. And part of that's because we don't build after the bridge. They would dedicate the right of way in their property and slope easements necessary to build them. That would be the normal way of doing it. So if there was a plan that, for instance, alternative 2 or 3 was adopted in the comp plan, and then that property were to be developed into a site plan, they would have to show an alignment in more detail, dedicate the right of way for it, but not probably build anything past the intersection with Wake Towne Drive, because that would have been basically an unusable piece of street, potentially dangerous, maybe a maintenance issue. But that gets very specific into how their site interacts with them at a point of access, then they would definitely build up to that point. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah,
Yes.
they have an obligation to meet the subdivision regulations, regardless of whether there's a project or not. And depending on the stage at which that project is in and how it's funded, things can proceed a little bit differently. So that we're not having a developer build something that we're simultaneously building. At some point, somebody has to go first. And at this point, we cannot know how that's going to happen.
Well, I was trying to draw the comparison to Benson, where the developer finished Benson and also the segment in front of his property for St. Albans. I didn't realize there's a reciprocity in there that he can get reimbursed for that. I thought he took that under his own cost.
It depends on the amount of intensity that's developed. And the simple way to put it is if there was a 4-lane street and somebody built a small development, let's say it was just 10 or 15 apartments, they might have to build 2 lanes of the street, but the extra capacity that's part of the regional network is not their obligation and reimbursement. And there's a more complex calculation that I don't work with directly that leads that determination, but there is an ability to pursue a reimbursement contract for those sorts of things and also pursue public-private partnerships when there's a disproportionate. So on Benson, I think that those were cases where it probably was proportionate. I'm not familiar with the exact site you're talking about.
Thank you.
Larry, can I add one more point here?
Sure.
While we're talking about, I just want to make sure we're being fully transparent. I didn't get a chance to say this before, but the developer or the potential developer of that property has been in touch with us and is aware of the alignments on the property. And we shared some CAD files with them and they looked at how development could lay out with the street. During that process, we hit, we learned of a sewer project that overlaps the area and we kind of paused coordination with them. So we didn't land on here's a design that works for everybody, but there was some discussion previously with them.
Good to know. I like to reference that actually. Cynthia?
Just a question about the TIA at that site. And I understand that there's not going to be a TIA required by the City Department of Transportation at 2924 Computer Drive, which is the rezoning that's Z4722. Could you please state the basis for the Department of Transportation deciding there would be no TIA at that location?
Sure. So when we just make a decision about a TIA for a rezoning case, we compare the build out of the site under their current zoning, if no change is made, how much intensity of development could they put on the site, to the build out under the requested zoning. And we translate both of those things into trips, peak hour trips, rush hour trips, basically. So if that difference is below the threshold that we've set, which is 150 trips, we don't require TIA, because we find in that case that that's enough of a marginal increase that it's not going to have big impacts on traffic that are appropriate to study in that way at that stage. So I believe with this particular zoning case, their initial request triggered a TIA and they got that feedback. And then they added some conditions to the request that limited the amount of development they could build on the site. And with that kind of revised, more limited request, the TIA is no longer required.
A follow-up to that, Anne, based on the fact that the multimodal bridge could come through that piece of property, and based on the fact there's probably going to be a multimodal bridge, will the Department of Transportation recommend a TIA for the calculation of the traffic count across the multimodal bridge as part of the analysis for determining where to place or where to route the multimodal bridge?
So in thinking about kind of the scale of analysis of these alternatives that we're looking at right now, we looked at overall traffic flow, and we kind of summarized in that scenario that we found alternative 2 to support that traffic flow the best, and alternative 3 the worst. And that's summarized in some of the documents that are going to be posted soon and that you've seen, Cynthia. The level of a detailed traffic analysis is something that we would get into later as design advanced further. But at this point, we did a higher level review of traffic performance.
Just a quick follow-up, and then I won't ask any more questions. But wouldn't you think that since the multimodal bridge, the basic numbers you've already got from VHB are that it's going to be a minimum of 12,000 to 14,000 daily trips across that minimal. And since Avondale across the northern side there has an increase of 30,000 trips per day, and because the purpose of a bridge is to move traffic, wouldn't you think that this, and because the Midtown project's #1 of the 7 big moves was to build a bridge, wouldn't you think that a traffic analysis, a comprehensive traffic analysis for the multimodal bridge would be fundamental, and that the Department of Transportation would need that to decide which route?
I think the analysis we've done is sufficient for where we are in serving our needs. When we're looking at like the overall street network, we use tools like the Triangle Regional Model, and we can estimate the capacity of different links. So we're getting in the weeds a little bit, and we can talk further about this at the meeting, but I do think that we completed an appropriate level of analysis for where we are in the process.
Any other question?
Kevin Gard had a question, I believe.
Yes, I would like to add some input about they had several different ways of possibly having a bike lane mixed with pedestrian sidewalks. And one comment I want to make, and I'll try to make this the open house as well, is how well one option works versus another. One of the things I've found is it depends quite a bit on how the bike lanes and the sidewalks meet up with the other services on each end of the bridge. I regularly use, like 3 days a week, use the sort of pilot Gorman Street connector between Sullivan and Hillsborough Street, and I find that one of the issues there is going in one direction. It is very convenient if you're on the side of the road where the two-way bike lane is provided. But it coming in the opposite direction, say like heading north on Gorman, you would have to cross twice to stay within the bike services on both sides of the road. So for instance, you'd have to cross west over Gorman and head north. And once you get to Hillsborough Street, you have to cross Hillsborough's Gorman Street again to get back to the bike lane that continues on to Wade Avenue. And that kind of situation discourages use of the two-way bike lane on one side of the road. So I know at Quail Hollow Drive, where this is going to connect over, the situation is very, very different than the traffic situation on Gorman. But I wanted to make that comment that it will be important to see how these services connect on both sides of 440 to be able to understand how well it's going to serve the pedestrians and the cyclists coming through.
Thank you, Kevin. That's really good feedback. And you know, Larry pitched that it was a good idea for me to come to this meeting so that I could refine the materials for the other meeting. So I will make sure to also have an area map that we can really dig into some of those points as we're thinking about the connection on each end. And I do want to say that we are working on a two-way bikeway on Faircloth to try to improve the situation that you're describing. So hopefully that's coming soon.
Just a short comment to go along with that from the pedestrian point of view. It would be nice if you could perhaps put the walkers on one side of the road if you're going to create the two-way bike lane on the other side of the road. I'm sure nobody wants to be walking on a bike lane going both directions with nowhere else to go except maybe to hang on to the side of the bridge. So my only suggestion would be to put the pedestrians on the other side if you're going to go the route of the two-way. Okay, any further questions? Not often we have transportation staff at our beck and call here, so I'd say anything that's on your mind, go ahead and answer.
I did have a question. I'm sorry. This is not for me. It's for someone that could not be here, and he has been following closely and related to the flooding on St. Albans. I don't know if that's in your ballpark or in your area, but there's been a lot of flooding on St. Albans with even minor showers. The construction and the clear cutting on both sides of St. Albans, which is a road that goes between Six Forks and Falls or Wake Forest Road. What is being done, or how can we mitigate that flooding that is going on even with minor rainstorms at this point? Thank you.
Yeah, so I received that question ahead of time. So I sent it to Wayne Miles in our stormwater division, and they have looked into it and they think it's a maintenance issue. So the last email I saw, he said that the inlets are in need of some cleaning and the contractor is committed to cleaning them. So long story short, Wayne is aware of the issue and they're working on that.
Thank you.
Well, from my point of view, I'm very glad we're discussing roadways that are within the Midtown area plan. I always make the comment, maybe right or wrong, that getting the city to spend some money on all of the roadways that are outlined in the Midtown plan would be a very good thing. And there was a nice timetable laid out. So I was very pleased to see that the one study was underway for the bridge. I'm assuming at some point, maybe there'll be a study for the other bridge as well, the pedestrian bridge that connects from Wake Tech over to Industrial Drive.
Yeah, I don't have any update on when, but yes, that's another kind of the other half of this priority big move in the plan. So yes, but sorry, I don't have more information.
Well, at least I know it's coming. That's good. And the other one, I guess, is I've been reminded by some of my neighbors that the Bland Road extension That's gonna connect to, not sure, maybe come down to St. Albans and Benson. I'm not really sure where that one's gonna wind up. But it's part of the connectivity to parallel Wake Forest Road. And it looks like they're surveying it now. So I was wondering if anybody knew a timeline for that one as well. It's part of the street connectivity, the big ring, I think it's called connecting ring, somewhere along the line.
Ann, are you sharing? Yeah. there we go.
Yeah, I was just gonna put this on screen to try to answer that. What I was gonna say is that I'm not aware of any, city project along this corridor. Is this the corridor you're talking about, Larry?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, but as development occurs, like Jason was saying before, they would be required to build out any pieces that cross their property.
Yeah, they've already, some of the properties, I guess, are gonna be involved. But one of the biggest properties, the Montecito Apartments, has been rezoned. I don't know if it's gonna prompt action on their part or not. They knew the roadway was coming at some point, but at the same time, they were saying that there weren't any plans to do any redevelopment of the property. So that's why I was asking about perhaps the status of that connectivity.
There isn't any intention of the city to proactively, purchase property and develop that street or any parts of that street. At this point, that could change in the long-term future, but I think our expectation is that as those properties develop, those development requirements will have them build their incremental part of that. So if you're seeing survey activity happening somewhere, it's probably a property owner either just investigating what they've got. Maybe they're planning something, maybe they're looking to sell some of their lands.
No,
But it's not the city doing a survey for that street.
Okay, the survey is occurring along Colby. If you can see that on your map. Yep.
It may be if that property were rezoned, it may have, I'm just speculating, I don't know anything specific. It may be that after rezoning, they're looking to potentially market a portion of it or, divide it or, at least have some idea of what it is from a property ownership standpoint.
Okay, but from your
But
standpoint,
yeah, I don't believe there's been a site plan submitted for that, and I haven't heard of any sort of sketch plan or
Okay.
discussions with developers about early stage sort of things.
okay, that's good to know.
I was just gonna send a reminder about this map, as we're sort of talking about what's happening and what's coming. This is a map that's always on the city's website. If you just go to the main website and hit projects, you can look at it. The data in it isn't perfect, but it's our attempt to kind of make it easy for you to try to figure out what's going on if you see something happening. But development is not reflected in this map. So I agree with Jason, it's probably development related.
Okay, thank you, Ann.
I have another question, if I may. This
may.
is Cynthia. And going back to your timeline, you said that the public input would continue through February for the routing of the bridge. Could you please describe to me after that, how does the timeline play out for a selection to be proposed to the Planning Commission and the City Council? Could you give me sort of a timeline on that?
Yeah, I'll do my best. The process of getting to this point has taken some time, Cynthia, and I know that has been frustrating for some. And my intention would be to pretty much immediately initiate that comp plan amendment after this February period. I don't know exactly how long that tends to take. I don't want to put you on the spot, Jason, but do you have any sense of if we were to initiate that right in the beginning of March, how long until we would get to council?
I'm going to go by memory and then I can check for the last time we submitted one. But I want to say maybe 4 months total. given the time, calendaring times, and some of that depends on how busy planning commission is and whether we can make it quicker on an agenda. Anything shorter than that seems a little unlikely.
Does it go through the planning commission first and then to the city council?
Yes, ma'am.
And one thing you said in one of the answers at the beginning was, if it's not alternative one, it will require a street plan amendment. So if it's alternative 2 or 3, it requires a street plan amendment, and that's an amendment to the comprehensive plan. Is that correct?
Yeah,
So-
that's correct. We don't reflect, street alignments exactly as they get built, but if they're different enough that it's really shifting onto other properties, we try to reflect that because it's important to things like developers building out the street plan as they develop. So yeah, we think that would be different enough that we'd want to do an amendment.
So it would be presented to the planning commission as an amendment to the comprehensive plan, correct?
That's right.
All right. So if instead of 2 or 3, it was alternative 1, would there be action to be taken by the planning commission or the city council?
No, there wouldn't. I mean, if everyone decided alternative 1 was the preferred, it wouldn't really require an amendment. But that's where I was saying that I think we would take this process to council and share it with them.
Because that's the only way you'd have a public hearing if it went to council. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a way for citizens to present their position through a public hearing.
Yeah, I mean, you can always go to public comment at council and talk about it, but yeah, it wouldn't be a public, if it's not a comp plan amendment, it wouldn't be a public hearing at council, but it would be some kind of presentation to council in that scenario. Then this process is our attempt to get and document that public input ahead of initiating this process.
And what would that document be that would go to council? What would that be called?
I don't know, sort of, some kind of update. Honestly, we haven't laid out exactly what that would be. I just think, and Jason looks like he wants to chime in.
Yeah, I was going to say, if that was staff's recommendation to keep it at the alternative 1, which is currently in the street plan, I would imagine we'd be asking the city manager to include it in her report to council, and it would get scheduled, in conjunction with the mayor and the rest of council of what they've got time for, and there'd be a presentation presumably, and would give the council to provide the information and let them confirm or give us different direction or hit it. Just if and for many of the folks on this call, I know you do watch city council meetings quite frequently. There's often a report of the city manager that's about some issue that there needs to be a policy decision or a check on, and I think that's how it would look if it were to go that way. And if it were a comp plan amendment, then staff would submit it and it'd go through review of planning commission before council.
So Jason, my question is, and this will be the last follow-up on this, but if it is alternative 1 and it goes through a report to the council and there is no public hearing, is there a procedure by which the citizens can make public comment on that particular issue to the city council?
Not as a part of that agenda, but the agenda is published the week before. You can see what the report is, and you can let your council members know how you feel about it, sign up to speak at a general public comment before or after, and really any time. And so it could be, for instance, that let's say staff did make that recommendation. Some council members hear that there's concern, they might table it and ask more questions, or they might say, we disagree. And so it really gets to be their decision and how they want to proceed when they hear their information from us.
Would the city give feedback to me as someone who would be impacted by alternative 1, so we would know when that would come before the city council? Would we receive any kind of notice of that?
I think that, and maybe you could answer the question which is kind of very much in the hypothetical of how you would let folks who have been engaged in this process to date know about future things that are happening in this process. And I don't know. if
Yeah.
that's-
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll just say that our goal whenever we conduct engagement is to close the loop with folks that have been involved. And so we would want to, in a scenario like this, where we have a very clear next step we're trying to get to of either the comp plan amendment or not, we would notify everybody who participated of where we were headed. So yes, we would notify you, Cynthia. And I'm
Okay.
happy to talk more offline. If you'd like.
Just as a follow-up to what Cynthia is asking, there's already a resolution and language in the Midtown Area Plan to discuss the alternative with conditions. It looks like there'd have to be a modification to the map that's contained within the Midtown Area Plan, because it still shows, I think, a connection to Barrett. I would think that would spur basically a modification of a street plan in the Midtown Area Plan, which then ultimately would get rolled into the comprehensive plan. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You mean if we went with alternative one, we might need to update that area specific
No,
guidance?
if we went with 2 or 3.
Yeah, we went with 2 or 3. There would be edits to make. Probably to the street plan and also to the area specific guidance. I don't know. I honestly haven't been through this process fully before, so I'd be leaning on some of my colleagues. I don't want to misspeak. But we would want to get that documented, in all the appropriate places.
Yeah, I think that alternative 2 or alternative 3 would be a number of comp plan. There'd be amendments in a number of places in the comprehensive plan. First and foremost is the street plan, which has a regulatory effect through site plans and subdivisions. But the maps that Mr. Halfont is mentioning in the area specific guidance for the Midtown plan would also be edited at the same time. And as, to be honest, theoretically, if there were buy-in to go with alternative 1 and council confirmed that, we would need to amend the street plan, but at some point we would probably look to amend those area specific guidance, which specifically talks about a study that we've completed. And, and remove from the plan any discussion about alternatives that have been ruled out. But so eventually I think there would be some amount of comp plan amendment, but a confirmation of the existing alignment is likely to have those amendments be rolled into kind of an annual cleanup of completed actions and things, rather than a specific issue amendment where we'd going to change a very specific thing.
And thank you. And it looks like Alan had a question about the St. Albans. I don't know, Alan, I can't speak to that. You had a question about the St. Albans roadway plan. I'm not sure. He posted something in chat. Does that?
I thought part of tonight's meeting was going over between Benson Drive and the other end of what was being done on St. Albans Road. A presentation was to be given on that. If I'm mistaken, I'm sorry.
The next agenda item talked about the street plan and kind of status of segments and funding. I think that's what you're referencing, Alan.
That is correct. Thank you.
I can shift to that. My intention with that item, I received some questions ahead of the meeting. One of them was about the Benson Drive segment that we already spoke about. And my thought was that I could just try to explain high level how the street plan works, which I think we've talked about a little bit, but the street plan designates, what is the ultimate cross section we're planning for every street, but that doesn't mean there's any funding or timeline associated with building any particular street to that ultimate section. So a line on the street plan that you see in IMAPs doesn't imply a funded active project. Specifically at St. Albans, that street is designated as a 2-lane divided street, and it is being built out that way along the development that's happening on each side. One key upcoming improvement that you can expect is that they're working on a signal at Hardemont, is kind of part of the plan right now that would go in with one of the next phases of North Hills East. So that's probably the near term thing that you're gonna notice upcoming on that corridor. We have looked at a couple different options there, but at the moment, that's the most likely traffic control to move from there.
There's a section of road on the Kane development side. I'm assuming when he starts the innovation project that calls for a widening of St. Albans up to Church Street. I'm assuming that Kane is expected to do the same thing as DeWitt Carolinas did and complete that portion of the widening.
I'm not familiar with the innovation project that you're talking
It's
about.
the piece of property that sits right now between the developing portion of North Hills East and Midtown Exchange. The only wooded
Okay.
section left along there.
Okay, yes, okay, so you mean like this big area?
It'll run from Hardemont basically to Wake Forest Road.
Yeah, I mean, if this, as
Yes.
this piece
Yeah.
develops, the improvements would be required along the south side of St. Albans to widen basically half of the ultimate section.
Yes.
It gets a little bit tricky, and I don't know exactly what's happening here, but the requirement is to build out half of the street, not necessarily, you know, but there's existing homes over here, we wouldn't be widening into those.
No,
And
there
so it
should,
doesn't always end up exactly like the street section.
yeah, there should be an agreement with Kane that there shouldn't be any encroachment on the house side. It would all come from the Kane property on the other side. But either way, I guess we're
Yeah.
waiting for his
So I guess,
ability to do the
Ann,
road.
excuse me, Larry, I guess Ann and Jason, the statement on that particular stretch was the original rezoning agreement between Kane and the neighborhood, and back when the Midtown CAC was an actual body of the city, the agreement that Kane had was that the bike lanes on that particular section of the road would be maintained after development. The question is Kane went to city council and said, this zoning is very old. And the city council within the last 2 years said, oh yes, it's very old. So the Kane group actually resubmitted a zoning plan to the city. And I'm not sure if the requirements and agreements with the neighborhood were kept in the plan, because DeWitt Carolina in their zoning plan had stated that they would put in 10-foot sidewalks and they would maintain the bike lanes. And John Kane, because of the DeWitt agreement on his initial agreement of zoning, said that he would maintain the 10-foot sidewalk and the bike lanes. But since the Kane Development Group has gone back to city council and rezoned it, I don't think those agreements are still in place, or I haven't seen them. So my question to staff would be, how do we make sure those agreements of maintaining a proper road section through that area after the developer is done is going to happen? That's my question.
Yes, and I agree with you, Alan. The real question is how St. Albans will be widened in accordance with the street plan. And basically with between what the neighbors want and what Kane wants.
So when you say an agreement, if it's a zoning condition,
It was a zoning condition
it
at
was
the
a
time,
zoning
correct?
condition? Okay,
On the initial zoning. And
Right,
then since that time of the initial zoning, it had been applied to city council and was rezoned because the time frame was a long period of time or some particular reason. So I don't know if any of those conditions were actually included in the second, in the rezoning, the recent
Okay.
rezoning.
yeah, you're talking about the
And the other-
2016 rezoning.
Correct. Or it was even later than that. It was the 2016 was the initial, right?
Yeah,
No,
they-
the last time that property was rezoned was April 18th, 2017. I'm gonna drop
yes,
the link to the zoning conditions in the chat for everybody's benefit.
yes,
That was a expansion, if I'm not mistaken, of the original North East Master Plan, but I don't remember the date of that
yes,
North East Master Plan.
yes.
So,
It was
so the other thing is,
Z16, or I'm sorry, Z2816.
yeah, okay. So the other thing is specifically since with the traffic calming on the Hardemont corridor and the loss of bike lanes through the Hardemont corridor, very sensitive to losing any more facilities in the area. And then also specifically, if we could have, I know we're running out of time, if we could have a future presentation looking at St. Albans between Wake Forest Road and Tar Heel Drive, because that section of road of St. Albans has, I like to use the term, lots of goat paths because there are no sidewalks through that area. And the city really needs to improve that area. There's also the Wake Development Center that's along there. So that corridor of any corridor in the city these days really needs sidewalks. And I'm speaking to the city councilors if they're still online. That area is really underserving the entire area. So let's just keep that in mind. If we could have a presentation specifically about that stretch in the future, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you again for your time, both Jason and Ann. Thank you.
I guess to follow that up with Alan's comments, I guess the real question is, what is planned for St. Albans, the portion we've just talked about in terms of road improvement? Because I know that road widening with bike paths was on the schedule to be done at some point. And then Alan, you are absolutely correct that the other portion of St. Albans, and I guess it goes along with the bridge connectivity that may happen someday, was also scheduled for sidewalks and improvement. So if we could get a follow-up on basically St. Albans, if there's any work in the near future that's planned, or perhaps what the status of St. Albans to enhance connectivity is going to be at some point.
I'm going to address that a little bit. You're putting Ann and I on the spot when we tend to think in our roles are very much big picture network and not in the plan review details. So the nitty gritty of how site plans are approved and how they're reviewed to zoning conditions and requirements and something we get in the weeds on a lot. There could very easily be a follow-up on any specific number of sites that are in review or recently approved along St. Albans. The portion east of Wake Forest, I'll address that. And Larry, you mentioned scheduled to be. The only things that are scheduled are things that are in the capital improvement program. There is some adopted policy from council that either something is funded or is expected to be funded, and there's a tentative commitment to fund that. There is no programming of a project. So it's in the street plan to make that a 2-lane divided avenue. And I can point you to the standards for that, which is what the city would eventually plan to do. But there isn't funding to pursue that at this point. That doesn't mean that it can't be allocated. It doesn't mean that council can't put that into the capital improvement program at some point. But it's not scheduled in any way, shape, or form right now. It doesn't mean that we don't also know that it's an important need. We have a lot of important needs around the city and have limited capacity, both in terms of project management and in terms of CIP dollars, capital improvement dollars to execute these projects.
I'm glad you clarified that, which brings me back to what I always say, that there is no city funding for the things that are outlined in the Midtown area plan, even though there is a schedule. You are absolutely correct. I don't see them show up in the capital projects listing.
And when you're saying the schedule, I think you're referring maybe to an implementation matrix or something that's in the plan that talks about things being near term, midterm, and long term. And that's meant to represent the relative priority and the relative dominoes within that plan. But I don't think we can't commit future city councils to budgeting decisions when we adopt a plan. We can only lay forth an intention of how things should proceed in terms of the order. And sometimes they go fast and sometimes they go slow, but we try to follow the order of first, second, third, or early, middle, and late when we work on these plans.
Thank you. And we will take the onus on of pursuing with the city to get the funding necessary. If you just if you just lay out the priorities from your point of view, we'll take it from there. Any other questions? I'm going to ask one, but I don't think it's within your scope. Quail Hollow is outlined to be a green street at some point. Is that within your call, or is that, I guess, stormwater?
I can address that a little bit because the transportation department has been coordinating with stormwater and the Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department. And I think that what's likely to happen is that stormwater is planning on making some investments, both because of need that they see in their own modeling and because of the Midtown plan. The Greenway corridor that follows roughly parallel to Quail Hollow is an important priority now, and it's partially funded through the Parks bond. And in conversations I've had with the Parks Department, they think it's most likely that implementing the Greenway Trail in that corridor is going to be in the right of way of Quail Hollow. It seems unlikely to be appropriate to put it in the backyards of the people who live along Big Branch Creek and try to sandwich it in between the structures and the floodway. So the less impactful way is probably putting the right of it. So we have I guess a number of different needs on the right of way of Quail Hollow that could be synergistic and need to be coordinated a little bit. One of them is that section of Quail Hollow is in the neighborhood traffic management program as a potential project for traffic calming in 2 years. One of them is the Green Street stormwater BMPs, or the green stormwater infrastructure that stormwater would like to put in, and the other is the Greenway Trail, or some portion of the Greenway. And I think transportation is looking to get those three different trades or those different perspectives together and coordinate that section from Hardemont to Millbrook kind of as one project over the next few years. But exactly how and when we do that and who leads what, whether it's stormwater or transportation or some other, project, the project management hot potato is going to be a little bit of a challenge, and we've got a lot of different things to kind of build into that, but they seem to be synergistic, and we're aware of that and working towards it.
Is there a central contact for that? How do we get involved with that?
I think at this point, there's a contact in the stormwater department. I'll probably start with Wayne. I don't know if there's somebody else identified. And the parks contact for the parks aspect of it, and traffic calming administrator Will Shoemaker for the traffic calming portion. So at this point, there's not a central point of contact. I think that's something we're looking to try to create as we move into the next step of that section. And a part of that's responding to the election on the parks bond. Until that point, parks didn't have anything funded, so they're starting that implementation activity, and that's one of the first steps is defining what happens.
Okay. Patrick?
Yes, sorry, I joined late and I didn't hear the date for the open house that Anne had been talking about. But can you repeat the date that you're expecting?
Yeah, it is February 16th from 4:30 to 7:30 at the 5 Point Center. We are finalizing materials, and we will send an email blast that you guys can distribute to everyone on this call, but that's the expected date.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I thank you both for your contributions this evening. It was great to have both of you as our guests, well, all three of you. I guess David, I don't know if he's still online or not, but it was nice to have the awesome threesome as our guest, and you guys put together a very complete picture, I think, of what the residents were looking for. It looks like we will still have to press for capital funding, whether it be through parks, stormwater, or roadways, to get the Midtown plan, although it's in writing, to get it funded for the future. And look forward to the open house about the bridge coming across the Beltline. For us, that'll be a major accomplishment, definitely for the Midtown plan, the first step in many perhaps to come. So I appreciate your visiting with us tonight. And I think we'll have a follow-up probably at some point. And I invite you both to come back at your leisure.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Have a good evening.
Okay. I don't have much left and we can almost wrap up the meeting tonight. Did have a few announcements, but I think we've touched on most of them already. I should put them into the chat for the record. I did mention about Jonathan Melton's get together at Deja Brew on Saturday, February 11th at 11 o'clock. And that Mary Black will have a similar community get together at Edit Beer Company, Saturday, February 18th from 12 to 2. A reminder that we are still looking for additional people for the nominating committee, particularly for chairman. I'll send a separate note out about that one. And in case anybody missed it in the chat, the property that was under discussion during today's meeting is up for a rezoning. And that's the property that sits at 2940 Computer Drive, but that's one side of it. And the other side is if you take Wake Towne Drive to the end, that's the property that'll be facing you. You'll see the sewer the man cover. How do I get that? The wording is all wrong. Anyhow, manhole cover, which is raised, and you'll see the deep wooded area, which is all the property that's subject to the rezoning. So it's going to be an interesting play to see how the rezoning and property management coordinates with the bridge coming across the Beltline. And the meeting for that is Thursday night at the Millbrook Exchange Center at, get it right here, 6 to 8. Is that correct? That's not correct. 7 o'clock. Now I've got it correct. So 7 o'clock at the Millbrook Exchange, that's Thursday evening. And if anybody is interested, should be an interesting meeting. Be good to attend. So from my point of view, I think that's about all. Is there anything from the general audience that I've either overlooked or you'd like to see in the future? And Patrick?
Yes, is that rezoning the one that Cynthia referred to as Z47?
Yes, Z4722.
Okay, thank you.
And it was posted late last week. I saw the signs over the weekend. I don't think many people got notice, but it is posted. Anything else? Anything overlooked? Shane, anything from your point of view?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I couldn't get my camera to come back. I do not. Thank you. This has been very informative. Appreciate the time everybody spent on this.
For me, the point of it all was it was really nice to get updates from transportation tonight. But I think what's more important is to get Midtown with as much money as tax value comes out of Midtown. It's amazing that we don't have any capital investment in Midtown. And that's why I suggested that the developers are paying their share if and when they get to that point. I don't think that's the appropriate approach, and that was the point of the Midtown Area Plan, was to get infrastructure spending from city government. They collect an awful lot of taxes from this area, and it's about time that there's some return. So that's my point of view, my editorial for the night. So without further ado,
Let me ask one more thing then. Whatever happened to the Midtown Services District?
Hey, it's funny you should mention that, Patrick. When the Kane project was first being discussed, the mayor decided to entertain that at her safe and healthy, vibrant community meeting. She had 2 meetings. She asked for a little more research on it and haven't heard of things since. I need to do a follow-up with the Midtown Alliance and see if anything generated further than what we publicly heard. So that's a good point, Patrick. I'll do a follow-up on that one. Anything else? Well, I appreciate your time tonight and look forward to seeing y'all next month. And next month, by the way, we should have Patrick Young as our guest, not just to talk about missing middle, but to talk about his vision for Raleigh, which should be very interesting. I have a little bit of a difference of opinion with the direction he's laying out for Raleigh. And most of you will notice it by the buildings moving closer to the road and the closeness of neighborhoods coming about. So think about that, and we'll see you all next month. Thank you.
Thank you.